Welcome to our kitchen. We are topping off with dessert. Although we should have maybe done dessert first because that's my priority in life.
One of the things I learned early on from Jennifer's family was that it's really important to make the pumpkin pie the night before.
Yes.
And that way you get to have pumpkin pie for breakfast.
Right. So you'll find that the recipe we have online makes 2 pumpkin pies.
It's very important. It makes 2 pies.
2
because
pies.
One of them only makes it till lunch.
Because if you only make 1 pie, there's none left for dinner in our house. So pumpkin pie is what we're making today. And this can be for your Thanksgiving 101. It can be for any time. It can be for breakfast. No, seriously though, we are going to teach you how to make pastry and pumpkin pie filling from scratch. And Jay is not a pastry chef, and even he can make fabulous pumpkin pie. So
when we used to have a little shop, the nice thing about this pumpkin pie recipe is it's one of the few things in baking that is almost foolproof, and it also multiplies well. That I took this recipe, essentially multiplied it by 10, and we would make batches of 10 pumpkin pies at a time. So I'm going to give you my assurances that this recipe works.
This recipe works. And so Jay's going to work on the filling. I'm working on the pastry. Now, a lot of people are intimidated by pastry, and this is my pastry recipe and my mom's filling recipe. So we combined, and mom makes the best pumpkin pie. So I've got just 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour and a little bit of sugar. It actually helps nicely brown the pastry, and it makes it a little more tender, and a bit of salt. And this is kind of a neat technique where, can you pass me a fork, please, Jay?
Certainly.
Where you don't even need any special utensils. Thank you. So this is a fork, and all I do is stir up my flour, my flour, sugar, and salt. And instead of a pastry blender, do you want to show me the pastry blender there, Jay? In case, if you have a pastry blender and you're used to using one of these, by all means, go ahead. I find the 2 knives method really, really tedious and not very efficient. So I actually developed, well, I didn't develop, other people did, but I have taken it on and I use a cheese grater. I hope everybody has a cheese grater. And we freeze the butter and the shortening. So it's just a little bit of shortening, and that helps make the pastry flexible. And it's particularly good for more beginners that aren't used to rolling out pastry. And it does make it nice and flaky. And so I'm grating the frozen. It never solidifies because it's fat. So it doesn't go solid, but it does get firmer. And you can see it's falling in shreds into my flour. And then I'm taking my butter. So the butter is also frozen, not firm, but just for about half an hour ahead. And you can see that shreds. And there's something so satisfying about shredding butter. And this makes tiny little pieces of butter that work really well into the flour. And then you get really even distribution, flaky layers, and all this butter makes your pastry delicious. So I'm just going to toss part of the butter with the flour. Jay, do you want to tell us what you're putting in your filling there?
Sure, I'm working on the filling, and this is a really, like I mentioned, a really great filling. And it's nice if you got somebody that wants to chip in and help. If you got kids or a husband or a brother or somebody that just really wants to jump in and help. So it's important to take your time doing it. We started with 2 eggs. I added them in one at a time. I whisked them until they were completely emulsified, the whites and the yolks. And then I took our pureed pumpkin, and I've mixed that in real nice as well, so that we've got it looks just almost like a paste. We've got the eggs and the pumpkin.
And for the pumpkin, I'm just going to, and the sugar. And there's brown sugar and granulated sugar. And going in. Now, Jay's only making a half batch right now for 1 pie because we already have one ready. So, and there's only 2 of us. So we're rationing this year.
We got pumpkin for breakfast for the next several days.
Although I have a feeling the neighbors might help take some pie off of our hands if we need it. So there's the butter all grated. So you can see it's just tossed in. I'm going to move that. And toss that in with a fork. You can use your hands. If you have very warm hands, use a fork. If your hands aren't too warm, you don't want to soften the butter at this stage. So just literally pick it up and work the butter into the flour so it's evenly distributed. There's no big clumps, but don't work it too much. So one of the things with pastry, a gentle hand and cold ingredients are your keys to flaky goodness. And don't mangle it. Don't, don't sort of keep working, because that's when you get tougher pastry. So just take your, where's my fork? You took my
I just took your fork.
He's so efficient.
This is why I'm here to help, right?
Fork. And a new fork. You could probably use the same fork if Jay didn't take it away and put it in the sink. So drizzle your water over top, and it's about half a cup of ice cold water that I actually literally put in the freezer for just a little bit. Don't get ice crystals in it, but you want it ice cold. And just toss it together, drizzling in the water until the flour is evenly moistened, and you can gather it with your hands. I'm going to hold a little bit back, and in case it needs a tiny bit more. But if you make it too wet at start, it gets a little bit sloppy. So it's better to hold a tiny bit back and then add a little bit more. And like I said, this is a really good beginner pastry because you don't need special utensils, and it's really very, very easy to pull together. So I'm going to just use my hands to gather it together. And then this makes 2 pastries. So if you only want to make 1 pie at a time, you just wrap one up and freeze it for later when you need to make another pie. Or you can make some tarts, or, and it could be done for a savory pie too. It does have a bit of sugar in it, so it's a little bit sweet for a quiche, but certainly you can use that same pastry for so many things. So I'm just going to gather it together, and I actually do use a scale to weigh the difference, to weigh the 2 pieces. So if you have a scale handy, that is very, very good. I'm going to eyeball it now because, and Jay just has that. That smells so good. What spices did you put in there, Jay?
So I added in some ginger, some cinnamon, some cloves, and a teaspoon of salt. And salt's and it's a small amount, but it's an important product in this recipe. When you put salt into food, what it does is it accentuates the other spices and flavors that are in a dish. And so if you like your pumpkin pie a little bit more kicky, you can add a little bit more of the ginger, a little bit more of the cinnamon, a little bit more of the cloves, but don't overdo it. Cloves, for me, they're one of the spices that a little bit is very enticing, and too much is it's going to turn you off. So be cautious. So all of that's been mixed in. Get these out of the way for us.
Do you want to move? You could show them how to do the cream. I'm going to start rolling. Okay. So normally I would chill that pastry for about 30 minutes. You don't want it too hard, because the harder it is in the fridge, the harder it is to roll out. So if you wouldn't actually mind grabbing my rolling pin, I can't quite reach it, Jay.
Sure, we're done with it.
Over there. So I've got a rolling mat here. If you don't have a rolling mat, you can roll right on your counter or a piece of parchment. One of the things with a rolling mat, it actually helps. You only need a tiny bit of flour. So if you add a lot of flour when you're rolling your pastry, it can get dry and tough. So key is, don't use very much flour at all. Roll it into a nice ball and flatten it. So you can see it's still a little bit soft because I didn't refrigerate it, but we're going to just wing it today. And flour your rolling pin. So it might get a little bit stickier because it is warm. And but once it's chilled, it'll roll out nicely. And let the rolling pin do the work for you. Don't press down, because when you're pressing down, you're squishing the pastry and you're actually making it tougher. So let the rolling pin do the work. I'm just doing really light strokes, lifting at the edge. And lifting at the edge makes sure you don't get those sort of really thin edges like that if you press down. So I'm going to scrunch that back up because I don't want thin edges. Lift and at the edges and sort of do like the points of a compass. So north, south, east, west. And I'm going to flour my rolling pin a little bit more. Like I said, this is a warm pastry, so it is a little bit softer, but you'll get the idea. And roll until it is a little larger than your pie plate. So I'm going to do the magic switcheroo now, because it's, you don't want to sit and watch me roll that whole thing out. But what we can do, I want to talk a little more about the pumpkins. So as you can see, we have some lovely pie pumpkins here. And you can use canned pumpkin for sure. You do want to try and buy a Canadian product. Of course, we want to support our Ontario farmers and buy local. And so we bought actually lovely little pie pumpkins from our local farm, and then roast them up. So cut them in half, scoop out the seeds, save those seeds because we like to roast those for snacks. And then
and salad garnish.
And salad garnish. and then roast your pumpkin. I didn't add oil. I didn't add anything. Just place it cut side down. I have a baking mat here. And this little one took about 45 minutes. A bigger one like this size would be about 3 pounds, about what you need for the recipe. So maybe make sure you buy a couple of pumpkins, because once you puree it, does pack down quite a bit. So you do want to make sure you have enough puree. You need about 3.5 cups for the recipe. So if you want to buy your own pie pumpkin, then you know it's an Ontario pumpkin, and check for that Foodland Ontario label. And we are thankful for our farmers, and they're all thankful for all of us buying all their wonderful products. So here's my pie pastry. So this one I rolled out earlier, and it's in the pie plate, and I'm just going to fold out around the edges, fold those over. As you can see, I'm sort of doubling it over at the edge here, and that makes a nice firm crust that doesn't flop over or burn, and flute those edges. And once that's fluted, I pop that in the fridge and then make my filling, but we're speeding things up today for you. So it's really very easy, and you could use a fork if you want to just do a more crimping. Oh, don't pour yet.
Oh, I'm not. I'm just coming over.
I need to flute.
I'm not going to interrupt the fluting.
Don't mess with the fluting.
23 years in, I know not to mess.
He knows. There we go. So now I'm going to flute. So I just take a thumb and a finger and hold it with this other finger and do a twist. So it takes some practice, but you can certainly do whatever garnish you want. You can roll out extra pastry and cut out some pretty leaves, some autumn leaves to decorate. And so that's all it takes is for your homemade pastry. As you can see, we were really gentle, keeping it cold. I would put it in the fridge at this point and chill it while we whisk together the filling, but we're going to speed that up. Pour away, Jay. And this is your wonderful pumpkin pie filling. As you can see, it's got the nice warm spices. And do you like pumpkin pie or apple pie? I don't know. We often have to have some of each, because we all want
Let us know what your preference is.
oh yes, we could have a poll.
Where we live here, we call it a combo.
We like the combo. So the final flourish on the pumpkin pie, according to my mom, is a fresh nutmeg and a little nutmeg grater. You could use a microplane if you have it, and just grate some fresh nutmeg over top. And it really does, it adds a little bit of a sprinkle, a little bit of a garnish. Preheat your oven to 425 degrees. Do that before you start making the pie. Make sure it's nice and hot. Bake at 425 for 15 minutes, and that crisps up the pastry and gets it going. And then reduce it down to 350, and it takes about 40 to 50 minutes. Now we're using a glass pie plate here. If you use a metal pie plate, it'll bake a little bit faster. You might have to put a foil around the pastry if it's getting a little bit dark, if you have a dark pan like that. And it really is so simple. I do recommend making it a day ahead, not only so you can have breakfast, but also it's a bit messier when you're baking, and if you're doing all the other preparations as well. It's nice to have the pie done ahead of time, and it does take a few hours to cool and set. Don't cut into it when it's too warm.
Fatal mistake.
Fatal mistake. Because it does need to set up. So you bake it until the custard is set, and you just stick a little knife or a toothpick in the center, and voila, we have our cooled pie. And this is the one we baked earlier, and as you can see, it's warm and spicy. Serve it on a rustic wooden board, and everybody will be dazzled. And happy Thanksgiving to all, and enjoy cooking with all of our Ontario products.
Indeed, and feel free to garnish it at the end with a little bit of Ontario dairy.
Some whipped cream.
A little bit of nice whipped cream goes a long way. Maybe a little sprinkle of cinnamon. So,
there we go.
And don't forget to wear your stretchy pants. Thanks, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.